It's time for our legal advice lot, and I'm joined by Avril Collentine of Cahir and Company Solicitors. Avril, good morning to you.
Good morning to you, Alan, and to the listeners.
Thanks very much for being with us. We heard yesterday on the show talking about the future housing rental markets and landlords, the smaller so-called mum and pop landlords, tenants, and I suppose concerns and issues maybe both sides of the divide would have. But you want to talk about this, maybe expand on this, the changes in the Residential Tenancies Miscellaneous Provisions Act, and what implications it has for both landlords and tenants.
Yes, Alan. So I think a lot of the listeners will be aware of what's happening. I think it's been well documented in both the print, in the newspapers and in the radio shows what's happening here. So, and it's been well discussed and criticised, I suppose, in some certain quarters. But the changes are here, and the new date and the key date here is the rules came in from the 1st of March. So it changes the rules on how and when the landlord can end a tenancy. And it introduces the whole new system of rent control. And the changes, I have to point out, I suppose, for the tenant who's listening today, the changes will only apply to new tenancies, which is created from the 1st of March. So if you're in an existing tenancy, these rules don't really apply to you. They're not going to change the existing tenancy. So if you're pre-March 2026, the old rules apply for you, but going forward for any tenancy created from the 1st of March onwards, they will apply to you. And I suppose for the landlords, the key changes are there about how they can end the tenancy. All landlords can end a tenancy in the first 6 months for any reason, but after that then they can only do so for very specific legal reasons and will depend on when the tenancy began. And for the landlord, the key thing is how many tenancies they have. So the new legislation differentiates whether you're, I suppose, a small or a big landlord, essentially. If you've 1 to 3 tenancies, there are additional rules you can use, but if you're 4 or more, or you're a company, then there really are only 2 reasons when you can end a tenancy. And I suppose we see this now, and it's like what we're seeing in Europe. There are more bigger institutional landlords and companies coming to the market, as you said there, and what was mentioned on your show yesterday by Dermot McMahon, the smaller landlords are leaving the market, and we're seeing that. That's reflected, I think there was in the last quarter of 2025, the RTB reported, I think there was over 5,000 notice of termination served, 5,207. I'm just looking there at my notes. So that's a rise of 41% over previous years. So you can see that there's definitely people leaving the market who no longer want to be landlords, possibly because of the changes in the laws. Maybe it's to do with income tax, and maybe sometimes you're an ageing landlord and you just want to get out of the market. You don't want the hassle of dealing with all this. But yeah, definitely we are seeing a shift in the type of landlords in Ireland.
And maybe we here in Clare are feeling that a bit more, because as Dermot and George Stavrow talked about during the future of housing, some of the bigger landlords, you'd see more of that in Dublin, maybe less so of it down here. It'd be more of the smaller landlords, so maybe we're seeing more of an exodus from the market of them. I just wonder, Avril, how can landlords end tenancy under the new 6-year period, the new rules? Okay,
so the new rules for anything created from the 1st of March, so if you're a landlord, you can breach or you can end the tenancy if the tenant breaches their obligations. And so that would be something like antisocial behaviour, rent arrears. There's, you still have that option. Or if the property is no longer suitable for the tenant needs, so that might be something like overcrowding, if you see that in a dwelling. They're the 2 reasons that if you're 4 more tenancies, they're your only reasons. If you are the smaller landlord and you've less than 1 to 3 tenancies, there are the additional reasons. If you need to sell to avoid undue financial or otherwise hardship, or if you, the landlord, or a close family member needs to live in the property. And we're seeing that sometimes the landlord's own children are coming back and they want the property for their own use. So they're the reasons. Any tenancy created before the 1st of March 2026, the 6 reasons, there's 6 legal reasons are still the same. So if the tenant breaches their obligation, if the property is no longer suitable for the tenant need, if you or a family member needs to live in the property, or you wish to sell the property, substantially refurbish or renovate the property, or if you wish to change the use. And there's no difference based on how many tenancies you have if it's a pre-March 2026. So the most common reasons there we would see, I suppose, is if it's the sale of the property. For landlords, again, you have to engage with the Residential Tenancies Board, you have to register your tenancy, and equally so then when you want to end the tenancy, you must serve the notice. You have to serve a valid notice of termination, and that must be copied to the Residential Tenancies Board. And that's, allowing us the data to see what are the amount leaving the market. But equally so, if you are a tenant and you're listening to this and you've been served with a notice of termination, you have a right of recourse. You can go to the RTB within 90 days of receiving that if you feel that it hasn't been validly served, or if there's a flaw on it in terms of the notice period or something like that. So the RTB are set up there to deal with these and regulate. So it's not that a case that, and often people say, oh, landlords can do what they like. You know, the onus is on everybody to play by the rules, I suppose. And if you have any issues, you should report it to the RTB.
Okay, yeah, definitely. So, and I know when people kind of heard new rules are coming in, and it was a point that was flagged up during the chat with George and Dermot, rent increases and a suspicion from some renters that this new rules would mean it'd be a way for landlords to be able to get them out so that they could increase the rent. Obviously, that can't happen. But can you tell us more, Avril, about what the new legislation means in terms of how rent increases work now?
Yeah, so all the counties in Ireland now are designated rent pressure zones. The new legislation then changes how the rent increases work. In most cases, rent can increase once per year, okay, and that is capped at in the rate of inflation or 2%, whichever is the lower, okay. The rule is intended to slow the pace of rent increases, I suppose, while allowing landlords to adjust rents over time. The rules are overseen by the Residential Tenancies Board. So again, if you're in doubt or if you feel like your landlord is jacking up your rent unfairly, you should bring this to the notice of the RTB. I know we're in a housing crisis. There's very little availability in the market. So most people will be inclined to suck it up and say, well, look, I'll have to, try and work with the landlord in some way. But I think, you really should consider reporting anything like that, any breaches, to the RTB.
Yeah, definitely. So anything else that people should be aware of, Avril?
Look, I think you should, check your tenancy. If you have a copy, make sure you have a written tenancy. If you're a landlord and you're listening, you need to make sure you've registered with the Residential Tenancies Board if you haven't already done that, because there's, breaches of that will incur separate legal action and fines. So it's important that everybody, maybe now is a good time to refresh and check that you have a valid tenancy agreement in place. For landlords, check that it's registered with the RTB, and take advice if you need to. The Residential Tenancies Board have a lot of data. It's clear, but it's complex. So they have a lot of information online for landlords how they can comply with the new rules. So, or if not, talk to your solicitor and see, or there's rental management companies who'll talk to people about the rent changes and what it means for you each case, and going forward how you can get advice and know where you're going. But it will create these new tenancies of minimum duration lasting 6 years. It is designed to give renters greater security in their homes, but for a landlord that might be something you mightn't envisage. You might have a small rental property for your pension fund and you might want to get tied into something for 6 years. So take advice, look at the RTB and talk to your solicitor.
Okay, Avril, thank you so much for that really important advice. That's Avril Collentine from Cahir and Company Solicitors.